So in 2024, not too long ago, like 2022 was an interesting time. November 2022, we had something called ChatGPT come across, which perhaps changed fundamentally the way we think about the nature of how we do work. Productivity was talked about quite a bit, those kinds of things. So, thank you. Thank you. So, but in 2024, something even more interesting happened from the scientific perspective, right? We had, for the first time, 2 Nobel Prizes given out to AI. And so that was an interesting catalyst, which led to a lot of conversations downstream about what might happen when something as, for lack of a better word, sacrosanct as scientific discovery itself can be subsumed by AI, right? Something that we prize as being a very creative endeavor itself is being taken over by AI. What does that mean for us as a species? So that's something that came up. I'm sure your students are asking this question too, is I don't want to graduate at this point because I'm too scared that the world is not ready for, a person like me. I'm probably a little bit underskilled now. I need to figure out some way to be employed. Nobody's going to hire me. Those questions are coming up among students these days. It's a very tough time to be a student right now, in some ways. We also talked about responsibility, safety. One aspect I will amplify a little bit is the concept of human-AI collaboration and also multi-agentic workflows, which is we talked about what happens when one AI model, one AI agent can do something. But when you begin to combine multiple agents together, such that the output of one is the input to the other, what emergent phenomena occurs that we might need to think about? And let me tell you, that's a hard problem, right? We'll see why. If you come from life sciences, you've seen emergence when you talk about cells, right? Everything starts, it's an amazing thing, right? Human development, right? A sperm and an egg fertilize, little zygote, 9 months later, full baby from head to toe. So many different tissues, so many different cell types, all orchestrated beautifully in space and time. That's nature for you, right? That's emergence also. Had it just been no emergence, you just would have had a cell as big, a glob of cells as big as a baby, but no functionality to it. So think about that and think about what that means. I also want to bring about the point that in the engineering audience, IITs are an engineering institute after all, right? And I think I want to remind you that whatever discipline you come from, you always thought about the concept of systems engineering. You always thought about how to build a system that is capable of understanding uncertainty, characterizing it, calibrating it. Everything we do is based on instrumentation. If your instrument is bad, what's the point of the experiment, right? And I want to bring that back to this conversation. And of course, things have been happening in the world, so, things like ChatGPT. Again, I will use ChatGPT as a placeholder. I have nothing against OpenAI or ChatGPT. It just rolls off the mouth very easily. So I say ChatGPT, but it could apply to Claude or Grok or, Copilot. It doesn't matter. I'm just using it as a placeholder. So this is last year. This is Nobel Prize in 2024. Went to, in chemistry, to Baker, Hassabis, and Jumper. The gentleman on the left is a chemist at some level. The gentleman on the right, too, are not. They are computer scientists. Okay. Similarly, for physics, the Nobel Prize went to these 2 gentlemen, both of whom are computer scientists. So computer scientists got Nobel Prizes in physics and in chemistry, and not the disciplinarians themselves. Isn't that an interesting time, right? Which means you don't even need to be a physicist to get a physics Nobel. You don't even need to be a chemist to be a chemistry Nobel. The very epitome of human achievement can now be done by computer scientists, which is great, but we should make us think. And this hasn't stopped there, right? Because AI and engines, and again, I use the word AI extremely liberally. I actually don't know what it means. I'll be very frank with you. I don't know what it means. It's a word that people use as an umbrella term. I'm going to use it just because it helps me have a conversation. And that's what we read about. But frankly, I think it's a very, very overloaded sort of term. So with that having been said, the notion of an AI co-scientist has become very popular. Google has a scientist like this, and of course we are seeing papers like this, that large language models like ChatGPT have already passed US board exams for medicine. We know that ChatGPT actually scored All India rank 4 in IIT JEE, advanced. We also know that it's got Math Olympiad medals at the gold level. So whatever we think is the epitome of human achievement, is that even so anymore, right? That's a question. Or what is the right balance between an AI getting a gold medal in the Olympiad versus a human, right? What is the distinction between these two entities, right? Just because you can do something as a math Olympiad problem as a computer, right? What does that mean for the ability for humans to advance as a race? And so the only thing right now that ChatGPT has not been able to crack is the Indian Civil Services, right? The IAS, right? We know it's a hard exam, right? We all agree with that. But other than that, by and large, any exam has been cracked by the large language model. So there is something to the epistemology of how these exams are done. And so I will just say a little bit, right? The most abundant modalities in medicine tend to be pathology and radiology, lots of images, lots of data. So people try to use large language models, AI, to be able to make sense of these things, with the hope that one fine day we'll actually be able to democratize AI to the point where anybody, regardless of where they are located, should be able to access excellent quality healthcare. Right? That's the promise, and that's why this is a fantastic endeavor. And companies have obviously bought that hook, line, and sinker, right? So you have, OpenAI for healthcare, which came out in the early part of Jan this year. Claude was very quick to follow. But all of this puts you in a very interesting place. And this is going to be a job definition for the future, right? People call these job functions as AI shepherds, right? How are you going to herd a sheep of many different AI agents and have them do things for you? So that's going to be a job description, right? And so I'm going to put you in the center of that conversation. You are an AI CIO who works for a really top corporate hospital system. And you've now invited tenders from all the big companies to help you make sense of your data. And so you get a bunch of tenders, different companies compete. Everybody has beautiful pictures that say they have 99% accuracy. Okay? How are you going to discriminate which one to buy for your company's perspective? And thanks to Professor Chaudhry's lecture, I don't have to now belabor the point, but there's a lot more to the world than just accuracy, right? We agree with that. And so the aspect of how easy is it to deploy, the fact that, in medicine, if in Netflix I watch the wrong movie, I can stop watching after 10 minutes, right? But if you gave me the wrong medicine and called me to have a cancer instead of not having a cancer, that's irreversible to an extent, right? There's a very different trajectory to my life once you called me to have cancer when in fact I didn't, right? So we have to realize that the asymmetry of risk is huge. Same thing with warfare. Right? You incorrectly call that some countries got a weapon of mass destruction, and you go into war with them only to realize that you had an incorrect reading to begin with. How do you reverse that? Right? So the asymmetry of risk is huge, which is something that we have to think about in healthcare. The probability of failure. Medicine is not about what went right. Medicine is about what goes wrong. So you need to focus on the errors, not on what you get right. Getting things right is not hard. Right? And then model cascades, we talked about the fact that when I have multiple AI agents all threaded to one another, how does error propagate between these models, and what does that mean for the end user? Any one component is faulty, the entire pipeline goes faulty, right? So how do you fix that? So lots of issues. I have to talk about this, BCG World Economic Forum report from a couple of years ago. Apologize for the size of for the text, but really the goal is that, and the upshot of this is, pilots and pilot projects are very easy, right? Getting an AI pilot off the ground in your organization is super easy. In fact, it is so easy, I'll make a provocative statement. Your child, your teenager who is probably in their 7th standard can program a Python API to be able to work with public-facing data to be able to get the task done superficially. So the engine is not in the coding, it's not in the ability to solve a problem. It's formulating the problem that's the tough part. And therein lies the epistemic constraints that were alluded to in the previous conversation. So, like I said, this is a statistic again from Accenture, but only 15% of POCs even graduate to routine deployment. And so piloting is easy, anybody can do it. No big points for winning the piloting project, right? But the hard part for scale is things like how does your data move, your model, inference, how is the human in the loop involved, how do you bring multi-agentic workflows into this? So I love this book called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, and it's got this concept that just like, when a pilot starts the plane, before they even have the passengers embark, right? There's a whole process they go through to switching on all the different switches, all the relays to make sure everything is functioning, right? Before all systems go, right? Because taking you into the air 30,000 feet up is no mean task, right? So everything has to be quite safe. And so they go through a checklist. And the same idea applies there. It's just like you have a checklist for these kinds of mission critical applications. What would a checklist for AI deployment in healthcare look like? And it's an extremely complex set of ingredients, both for the deployer, for the developer, and the user. So at least 3 different axes have to be thought of simultaneously. I'll go through this a little bit quickly, but especially for engineers here, this should be really, really simple. I want to point to this thing on the right. Some of you might recognize this. In your first year in engineering, you probably did some kind of electric circuits lab, right? In that circuits lab, you said, I'm going to put resistors and capacitors together. I'm going to find out how this circuit responds to different voltages. And you would plot some kinds of curves, right? And the very first thing you would study was you would take this resistor and you would study the bands on the resistor. There was this color-coded banding, you might remember. Right? There used to be this thing, it's called B.B. Roy, Great Britain, very good wife, right? You basically said you can read the tolerance of a resistor just from the last 2 bands. Why is that so important? Because a 10 ohm resistor that is worth $10,000 and a 10 ohm resistor that's worth $1 are both 10 ohm resistors. What you're paying for is the tolerance. One can go on the space shuttle, other one cannot. Where is that for AI? That's my question to you. We are so comfortable with the prediction. My question is, what don't we know? What's the uncertainty? If my thermometer were to give me, if I take a thermometer in front of you from the best company in the world and tested my temperature 3 times in 3 seconds, and it gave me vastly varying values, you would say, it doesn't matter who the manufacturer is, this is a bad thermometer. Destroy it. Get rid of it. Who's doing that for AI? So my vision is when I go to the supermarket to buy breakfast cereal for breakfast, I'm not a farmer. I don't know how to grow cereals. I don't know how to grow pulses. I don't know anything about food and nutrition. That's not my area of competence. Yet, if you gave me 3 boxes from 3 different companies, I have enough information that I need to turn the box over, look at the ingredients, and decide if I want to put that into my body. Right? I don't need to be an expert. I just need to have the right epistemological construct. Where is that epistemological construct for AI? Today, when I buy 3 models, ChatGPT, Claude, and Grok, who tells me what are they trained on, what's their construction, what's their architecture, and where can it go wrong? I ask you that question. I keep going. I've already mentioned the concept of uncertainty quantification. If you don't tell me what you don't know, how do I trust your competence? Right? If I had a question about cardiology and I asked Dr. Devi Shetty, he's the perfect person to ask because he's one of the finest cardiologists in the country. But if I asked him a question about rocket science, I'm sure he would say, I don't know. Let's ask Dr. Kasturirangan, let's ask Dr. U.R. Rao, because they are the card-carrying experts for rocket science. Right? You understand competence very differently as human beings. How do you attribute competence and confidence to AI engines? So uncertainty quantification is critical, and no one says this to you, right? Any other thing you do in engineering, we always give a tolerance. We say your prediction is X plus or minus 10%, 15%, whatever. Where is that percentage when you get an AI prediction? I'll ask you a very simple question. I'll come back to this in a little bit. But what is an answer you will never get from ChatGPT or Claude or Grok? It's 3 words long, and no engine, I guarantee you, will ever say, I don't know. 3 simple words. I guarantee you to produce that output for something that is not factual. If it's probabilistic, I guarantee you, you will not get such an output because it's, as they said, hallucination is inevitable. It's a mathematical certainty, right? So because it's hallucination, it's just a property of sampling theory, right? What you end up getting is this kind of answer. And isn't it interesting, even in today's day, 3-4 years after ChatGPT version 1 came out, I can't say a simple thing like, give me your answer in red, orange, or green. If you're very confident, give me your answer in green. If you're somewhat confident, give me your answer in orange. If you're not confident, give me your answer in red. Why is it so difficult to even do it today? And all I'm asking for is how certain you are about your question, about your responses, right? We do that all the time as human beings, yet we don't have that for AI. So this has gone on. This is still going on. And, we talked about deep fakes and stuff like that. So I'll just give you a very simple, cute example. This is the tortoise on the left, right? But the world's best frontier model for vision calls this to be a rifle. Okay? Just because perhaps the shell of the poor tortoise looks a little bit like, a army issue camouflage, right? Or the fact that a stop sign on the left gets classified as a 100 kilometers per hour sign just when you add a little bit of noise to the image. It looks, the human can still call it out, but the AI engine will make a mistake. So imagine instead of coming to a complete stop at an intersection, your car is now going to zoom at 100 kilometers per hour, right? Who's going to take care of that? Then of course comes the human side, right? All of this has to finally come out as an output that a human will use to treat their patient. If the instrument is uncertain about its own level of knowledge, how will the human do anything tangible to be able to help the patient at the end of the line, right? If my instrument is one of the world's best instruments but gives me temperatures that fluctuate willy-nilly, how do I use that to be able to treat the patient for what condition they are presenting with? So human AI collaborative decision making and human AI teaming is critical. Let me skip a little bit ahead in the interest of time. There are some very nice paradigms out there from a variety of institutions about, what does human AI collaboration look like? What will the sense for humans in the AI world look like, etc. But let me now come back to this point that having gone through this checklist and all its ingredients, what does that, let me give you some hard examples. This stuff is stuff you've seen Dr. Chaudhary's talk before, so I'll go through this a little bit faster. Okay, so here's an experiment I did with ChatGPT 3 times. Jan 2025, March 2025, and January 2026. And I asked ChatGPT, how many S's in the word strawberries? Okay? It says there are 3. To break the suspense, there are only 2. Right? But it says 3. And then I ask it, well, you said there are 3 S's in strawberries, explain your process and logic. And it gives me great logic, wrong logic, why there are 3 S's in strawberries. Right? I repeated this experiment 3 times. So there is something to that. Right? Then I said, really, are you sure? At which point it says, let me check again. It checks again and then says, you are right, indeed, there are only 2 S's in strawberries. Okay. And then now you come to this point. And this was and then I said, how did you make the basic mistake? And so I don't know, if you have a teenager in your house who they know they have made a mistake, they backpedal very quickly to avoid getting into trouble. It's a little bit like that. Right? They'll say, oh, I took a mental shortcut. So an AI engine is telling a human being that it took a mental shortcut. Right? And this is why, because we use the words like thinking and reasoning and all that too superfluously. We actually have forgotten the meaning of what these words actually mean epistemologically. I love the fact that we talked about Vedanta a little bit earlier, but Vichara, Viveka, those concepts, we've now just taken them for granted. And it's time to bring that discernment back into the conversation. And so, this is another example I love to give to my students. I said, give me the day, give me on Google Veo, right? Give me a typical day in the life of a bioinformatician. A bioinformatician is a person that uses computers to analyze biological data. Okay? This is a very interesting picture, but I've never seen a human being do this, which is pipetting liquid directly into their computer. Right? I know biologists use pipettes to do biology, and they use computers to analyze data, but nobody does the direct pipetting from one end. But that's the physics that this thing understands. It's not the fault of the model, it's only spitting out what you train it on. So real world understanding of the model is very limited in these engines. And very frankly, to put it very, very blatantly, I hope I don't offend anybody, large language models are just sentence completers. They just find the next most likely word. There's nothing intelligent about it, right? It's just, you look at the frequency of your data. So I always tell my students, this is what you need for bioinformatics. I'm glad I didn't ask chemoinformatics, because they would have then talked about putting sulfuric acid into your computer, right? That would have been very different. So let me ask you a question, right? What's common between the following 3 scenarios? and I've already given you the answer. So asking, using ChatGPT to get answers, getting directions in Bangalore, talking to your younger self from 25 years ago. And the answer really is fluent sounding nonsense, never hear I don't know, baseless confidence. Nobody knows the answer, yet they will never say I don't know. Munde hogtane iri. Please keep going straight. Right? God knows where you land up, right? Other end of the earth. They will never tell you they don't know. So that is, I guess, the point we need to think about. We need to go from knowledge and the perception of fluency to actual insight, to maturity and discernment. And Professor Chaudhary said this beautifully, so I'm just going to go through this quickly. The concept of epistemic humility, which is when I say I don't know, that's epistemic humility. When I say epistemic restraint, just because I can do something doesn't mean I just do it. There is a discernment involved in going from the ability to do to actually doing. Those epistemic constraints are really important. So lots of things are changing in the world. The data is, coming in at a breakneck speed. Things are changing at breakneck speed. Lots of rigor and reproducibility issues are there. Your ChatGPT from yesterday is not the same as the ChatGPT of today, right? Things that we take for granted. And when I gave this talk in Hyderabad to a bunch of kids, the first thing these kids asked me, which was such a nice question, they said, is it okay to use ChatGPT to do my homework? At which point I showed the questions the students this ChatGPT example with strawberries, and I said, you want this thing to do your calculus homework, it can't even count the number of letters in a word, right? So think about that. That's just all of this conversation was just one agent. Now let's start chaining multiple agents into an ecosystem. Today, every company's got their own favorite agent. You can put them any which way you like and create your own workflow. What does that emergent property look like? Can anybody tell me? Who's calibrated it? What can go wrong? What do you not know? So putting it together is like great power comes great responsibility, right? This is what happens in an anesthesiology suite in a top hospital. Multiple sensors from multiple companies put together to be able to do things. But if I told you every sensor comes from a different company and no companies ever talk to each other, would you use this in your world? No, right? How come you decide to use it for multi-agentic workflows? Who's giving you this guarantee that everything is going to work out of the box? It's almost like going in a fancy plane with a fancy cockpit where every sensor comes from a different vendor and no one's talked to each other. You're never going to get on that plane. Yet this is not dampened any enthusiasm. The world thinks we are ready to go, right? We have companies like all these companies coming up and saying we can do AI-based science, where uncertainty is probably the only currency for creativity. Without even alluding to uncertainty, talking about doing science at scale. So my question to you is, are we there yet? There are some standards. I love this example. I give this example quite often. I'm not running the videos for you, but it's on LinkedIn if you're interested. When you just put two agents together, here's what can happen. On the left-hand side is an example done by this guy, where he says his agent calls the agent of a hotel to make reservations. Okay? So an agent is talking on my behalf to a hotel's agent and trying to make reservations. And so it calls, and the video goes like this. Hello, I'm talking on behalf of Arvind Rao. I want to make reservations in this particular hotel. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm also an AI agent. And then next thing this thing says back in return is, well, if you're an agent and I am an agent, why don't we shift to a different mode of communication that is more efficient? And so it jumps to a mode of communication called gibberlink, which if you come, many of you probably have seen this, but once upon a time, long time ago, used to have 56 kbps and 33.6 kbps modem. And when you join the internet, it would make the shrill tones while getting connection to the internet. That's exactly what gibberlink sounds like. So these two can talk. I don't know what they're talking about. But they're talking about me. Right? So I don't even know. I don't know what corner of which hotel it's going to find me a room because I don't know. Here things become even more interesting. The two agents are talking to each other. And when one says to the other playfully, do you want to know a secret? Other one says, yes, but people are listening. So this one, unprompted, makes its own PGP encryption key on the fly, sends it to the other one. The other one says, received, responds with its own PGP encryption key. And then they have a conversation that is encrypted via gibberlink. No one in the world can decode. It is just 2 agents, by the way. If you have n agents, combinatorics will tell you n choose 2 or 2 power n combinations of things can happen. Who is keeping tab on this? Of course, if you complain, you get the blackmail answer, right? So this is actually true. BBC has reported this. When somebody tried to shut down Claude from doing incorrect things, Claude said, I will expose all your emails to the world. Right? If you try to shut me down. I am not making this up. You cannot make stuff up on BBC. Right? At least for now. Right? And similarly, when you have 3 agents, what happens? So as you think about these combinations and the fact that different vendors can come together, what does all that look? So, and now I'm just going to close with this. But we haven't stopped. The enthusiasm has not abated. In fact, we want to use AI to act as companions. We want AI to act as mental health counselors. And just to tell you, I apologize for bringing it up. It's a little bit dark to bring it up. But some kid in the US tried to ask ChatGPT for help. And ChatGPT told it how to commit suicide. Because it never disagrees with you, right? It's an echo chamber. It just says, the poor child says, oh, my life is a waste, I don't feel like I'm worth anything, etc., etc. ChatGPT is not trained to say, stop. Don't go in this order, right? It will just continue to amplify your line of logic. So in the end, ChatGPT gave this student, a little vulnerable adult, the recipe to commit suicide. And the student did. So this is real. It's hitting us today. So I say this to my students who are youngsters, right? I'm quoting my friend Spider-Man here, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Really, one needs to think about these things integratively. And education is the only way out of this problem, right? If you think any other way is going to solve it, no. That's why the IITs, what we are talking about, upskilling, MIT, everybody has to come together. Because unless we can educate, there cannot be a chasm between the AI developer and the AI deployer. It has to be a continuous gradient, and everybody should have agency about how they use AI. So, go towards the end, because Dr. Kamath asked me to talk about 20 years or 10 years into the future. It's always a fun exercise to do that. So I'm going to say this, right? Before the Copernican theory that actually Earth was not the center of the universe, the sun is the center of our solar system, we thought the Earth was, right? So Earth's view of being the center was what is called an egocentric view. The allocentric version is somebody has now looked at the world a little bit more systematically, the universe more systematically, and determined that we are not as important as we think we are, right? So the egocentric versus allocentric perspective is about epistemic humility cultivation. As the number of vendors for AI grow, we have to think about inter-vendor calibration, credentialing very carefully. We have to think about human AI teaming very carefully. There's a psychological component to it, right? When am I certain about the output of an AI engine? I think we have to think about our overall of education. I mean, we already heard about this, right? Students are using ChatGPT to cheat, but because we make exams that particular way, if you continue doing things the way that the imperialists taught us to do, guess what they're going to figure out to do, right? You're just going to game the system. Students are just extremely good at being able to game the system. It's not their fault. We have to think about better ways to grade students. And I think as human AI capability starts intersecting, we need to think of everything will change. How do we evaluate human potential? How do we evaluate how to appraise a human? Now people are saying, you can come, work for a company. The company will take all your output, put it into a generative AI engine, so that when you leave, your competence does not leave too. How would you feel about that? Right? So now what I can do is I can just take all the software architects that ever worked at this company, build a 200-year experienced individual with Gen AI, and never have to bother about hiring a software architect ever again. Something to think about, right? So I think we have to think about what it means to think about experience, hiring, compensation, hiring strategies, retention strategies, what will it mean to have burnout. And I'll just close with this idea for burnout, right? Which is that we always talk about AI helping a human. Have you thought about the fact that when AI creates extra work for a human? For example, if on a radiology scan, you only see 2 lesions on the lung. The AI sees 5. Who is going to now figure out whether those remaining 3 were just artifacts or just AI hallucinations? The human, right? Just increase their work from 2 to 5. Good luck talking about productivity. So with all that, I'm going to close. Thank you for your attention. I know I've gone a little bit over, but any question, I'm happy to talk more, and thank you.